FastTrack Grad Live Workshop. We are taking your questions from this week and giving you uncut, unfiltered, raw advice from Professor McNamara, who's in the studio with me here, and my experience as a professor over the past decade. And I'm really excited about this because we're going to give you a helpful guide on publishing. It was a great question from Lynn Armstrong, and we've got time for some additional questions from you as well, and a few more. So you're not going to want to miss this session. Diving straight in, I want to head over to you, Courtney, for this week's quick tip.
Yeah, so my tip this week is not to expect to get everything you need to be successful in your work from your primary supervisor. And this is because supervisors, they vary in their skill set, they vary in their experience, and they vary in the amount of time that they have available for you. So even if you have a great supervisor, perhaps they don't have the sort of time to spend looking at your work in detail. So the idea is to really have a network of mentors around you that can contribute in various ways to your PhD or master's program. And it's sort of feedback that you get on your work.
Courtney, I love that idea. And something we talk about often at FastTrack is not just having a supervisor, but really clarifying the difference between a supervisor and a mentor. Supervisor kind of built into that nature is overseeing your project, overseeing what you're doing, sometimes reflecting the interest more of the institution, trying to watch out for their own careers rather than maybe investing in you. What you really need is a mentor, somebody who is going to give you some of the valuable resources you need. They could be skills that could be helping you on the technical side. It could be opening up contacts for you, opening doors in the field. And it's really important to do this kind of self-reflective exercise and figure out, do you have a mentor? If not, what can you do to build that kind of trusting, mutually beneficial relationship with one? And beyond that, one mentor may not be enough because, as Courtney really points out, they serve different needs. Just continuing this thread for a second, Courtney, have you had some core mentors and how have they helped you along the way?
Yeah, definitely. And I think early on in my PhD career, I was probably over-relying on my PhD supervisor and just figuring if I was getting my work done, him and I were, we had a good relationship, and that was enough. But then, I started finishing my PhD and thinking about getting on the job market and such, and then realizing that I had no clue of what to do to prepare for the job market and how to write a grant, how to think about a grant, how to write a cover letter, all sorts of things. And then had to sort of, at the last minute, start reaching out and finding other resources.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely benefited a lot when I went on the market by having my mentors at the time really help me craft my application and also stay positive when inevitably rejections will come in, and it can really put you on a downward spiral. And so lots and lots of benefits to finding those mentors. If you don't have a mentor, you need to look no further because we have a lot of the resources that mentorship provides here at FastTrack. So even going out and trying to understand how to build your dream team of mentors, do join our Facebook group because we've got training on how to write cover letters, how to apply for jobs, how to finish your PhD fast, how to write up literature reviews. You're not going to want to miss it. And not all of us are blessed with mentors yet, but this is a very good place to start, and it's 100% free. Okay, with that, let's dive in. I just want to say hi to some people who are joining. We got some questions coming in. We do pose these questions in the chat. Do try to give us as much detail as possible so that we can help you. For example, so if you say, I need information about questionnaires, you try to be more specific about what you mean with that. Now, Lynn Armstrong, who's a big friend to FastTrack Grad, and I just had that wonderful opportunity to meet with her in Milan. Sorry, she can't be on the call because she's exploring Rome. But she asks here, I would like a basic guide to constructing a paper. And I think that's a really good question, especially because several people in the group might not have published a paper yet and are looking to publish for the first time. And others of you might be seasoned veterans, but could really benefit from some tips and shortcuts to make the whole process easier. So, yeah, Courtney, just kind of, if you think about, let's think at a kind of macro level in response to Lynn's question. Then I'll pull up a Word document and kind of thread out kind of what the essential ingredients are. But for you, what's kind of the overview, helicopter view of the structure of a paper? Bearing in mind, of course, we have field differences, but yeah. What's that macro overview for you, Courtney?
Yeah, so for me, if people have been watching a few of these videos, we've been going through a lot of structured abstracts recently, and I sort of abstract that out into a macro level for for scientific paper. So we'll have an introduction, we'll have the methods section, the results, the discussion, and conclusion. And each of those areas actually has very specific uh, considerations that have to be accounted for within them.
I'm just annotating as you go through here, Courtney.
Great.
Okay. Yep.
So if we start here with the introduction, again, like with the abstract, the very first thing that we want in the introduction is what is sort of, how does your research question relate to a hot debate, or pull us, this is how you pull us into your paper.
Yeah.
And from there, then we need to move to talk about what the actual previous literature, how it's situated in this debate.
Yeah.
And this should lead directly into your gap.
Gap, exactly. So prior studies in this area, and then you're trying to drive your readers to what the big gap is. Yeah.
And then from there, yeah, just a stated objective of the research.
Yeah, main kind of research question of what you're going to do. Yep, and the gap is something we talk a lot about in this group, that it's really important, really at the time of starting and embarking on your research, that you understand that what this gap is. And to make sure you've got a winning topic, we have some really great training using our convergence method to make sure you've got a hot debate in your field before you go too far. Because I would say, Courtney, about 90% of an eventual paper's success has to do with how good that topic is and how good that gap is that they've identified.
Yeah, that's, I definitely agree.
Yeah. Okay, so introduction. The other thing I want to say about the introduction is I like writing that last. I just think it's a hard section. You've kind of got to pull together everything and wrap a neat, tidy bow on it. And you would, if you were wrapping a present, you wouldn't put the bow on at the very beginning because it's going to get kind of banged up and maybe messed around. And this is kind of really what you're using to market and sell your paper to editors of journals, to readers who want to stop their day and pick up and learn something from your paper. So I like to save this for last. Okay. And Courtney, one big question on a research paper, I think, in answering Lynn's question, what differentiates this from just, maybe a commentary piece? Why is this, what makes it into a research paper in your mind?
Do you mean in the introduction or just overall?
Overall.
Yeah. So overall, I mean that there is a specific method that you're using to answer.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that, because to me, if somebody can't go out and replicate what you did, use the method and approach you took, and come to the conclusions you found, then it's just not scientific. And that's there's debates on whether string theory is a science, because we don't have the technology to test out the theories and pursue those scientific principles of replication. So this method section is really important. And if you're writing a scientific paper, you're going to need a method section so others can challenge and question the assumptions that you made along the way. So yeah, Courtney, just continuing this guide to the paper, what do you put in your method section?
Yeah, it really depends on which method I'm using, but of course the first statement is going to say what that method is and describe it. And a trick that I often use here is I look at, I think, what we've called our nearest neighbor paper. So another paper that's used the same method in a similar way to get an idea of how they structured it.
Yeah. Yep. So use a nearest neighbor paper. I like that a lot. And that's really something you can do in your introduction as well. This idea of the nearest neighbor paper is relevant and essential to any paper that you want to publish. So it really helps you establish the gap, and it really creates a perfect style guide for whatever you're going to write. So I like that. The other thing I like to think about the methods, Courtney, is to think about this a bit like a cooking or a recipe. Kind of, if you can boil down your steps, make them linear, simple and clear that others could follow them. So I'm really in the back of my mind when I'm writing my methods, I'm trying to give enough of the essential detail that people can follow what I did, and effectively I need to justify any choices that I made. Why did I, maybe if I had a data set, did I remove these data, and what threats or what guided my decision making process of that. So yeah. Any more to add on the method section for you, Courtney, here?
Yeah, I mean, I think two main considerations that have to be discussed here are, of course, the data
Yeah.
and the analysis. So if you are breaking down what the methods are and how you're going to describe it, then those are two
Yeah.
important elements.
Yeah, I think that's really important. What the method is, so you need to explain where your data came from, how you collected it, and then how you did the analysis. I think that those are essential ingredients. That makes a lot of sense, Courtney. Yeah. Oh, Courtney, I think I lost you for a second.
Oh, I'm here.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so that's good on the methods. Okay, then let's go into a little bit of the results. How do you think about this? Is something I find a lot of students find really challenging, figuring out what is a result. What I've done many things. How do I pick the main things to report here?
Yeah. So when I think about the results, I think of it as sort of, well, in some ways, it's one of the most exciting parts of the paper for me. In other ways, it's one of the most driest parts of the paper for me, because here you're just, whatever you've described your analysis in your method section, and now you're going to say exactly what the results were that came out of your analysis. It's exciting because the way that you present it, there's a bit, you can get a little bit of creative there, and you can think about what your key findings are. And so you can think about how you want to describe the results and how you want to lead your reader. I say it's one of the most driest sections too, because you can't discuss any of those results yet. You're just really laying them out for the reader.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point here, because you really, the principle, this can vary a bit by field, but the main principle that, again, we follow here at FastTrack is you want to kind of put the results and then you kind of separate yourself as a person effectively. And I did this approach and this method, did the analysis, here's what it shows, and save all the interpretation for the conclusion. So exactly. So I think that's key. Save interpretation and meaning of your observations for the conclusion. And Courtney, how do you go about this when you think about the key findings? Sometimes it can be hard to understand. Well, especially if you're new in your field, is this an important finding? Is this not? How do you approach that, identifying your key findings?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to think critically about your research gap and how your results are speaking to it.
I think that's really important. So you want to really focus on including things. You can't include everything, but things that speak to your research question and the research gap. And I think that's a nice guide, because if it doesn't relate at all to what you're setting up in your introduction, then why is it here? So that's a really good point. I'm just gonna switch the screen over and see if we've got any questions coming out as we look at this. So hang on, and I can see we got a few. Says there is okay, we got some questions about the sound, but yeah, Courtney's in a cafe, so yeah, we're doing the best we can, guys. We got some other questions we'll come back to. Okay, let's finish the guide for Lynn, and then we're going to come back to your questions in the group. So that's great. Okay, so yeah, key findings. I think the other thing that's really important here is, before you start writing, kind of have a kind of macro structure to your results. So identify maybe subsections that instead of just dropping everything together, ideally you can organize. You'll see some patterns emerging in your findings, and different ways of clustering the kinds of findings, or maybe there were different steps you had to take in your analysis that you need to report on. The key thing is you need some structure that's going to enable your key findings to breathe and be easily accessible for your readers. and speaking on some of my concrete papers, for example, I might have had an analysis where I did the analysis at the individual level. Maybe I did some interviews and I had a small number of people, and then maybe I had a quantitative component where I looked over a large number of people, and in so doing that needed to be split into separate subsections in the results. Any thoughts, additional thoughts on this, Courtney? Because I think that is often I see students struggling with this because they don't know what to put in there. They don't, and they kind of deviate from the gap, and they don't have a structure, and then they start feeling lost.
I see this a lot too, and I think part of it relates to thinking that you do your analysis and that the results are just obvious, and they're not always obvious. You have to think about them and synthesize them, and you really do have to have an idea of what your key findings are before you start writing up or before you have that final draft of your results section, because you need to have that organization, like you said, that sort of thematic structure guiding how you're going to write up your results. So I think students get frustrated when they start writing in their results and they don't know where they're going or how to get there.
Yeah.
But
Courtney, which is so important. Exactly. I think you want your analysis done before you get to this writing stage. And I see so many students, they've written this beautiful introduction, and then they do their analysis and results, and that introduction doesn't really fit anymore with the direction that they've gone. And they're kind of trying to tying themselves in knots to kind of hold it together. So yeah, I like to have completed your analysis and understand what your findings are before you put pen to paper or start clicking to write up these sections. Really good point. Okay, let's keep going, Courtney. Then conclusion. What do you want in your conclusion? Courtney, did we lose you?
Sorry, I was muted. So I was just going to say, here we either have a discussion section preceding the conclusion or a combined discussion conclusion section.
I like having the combined. So yeah, let's call it
Combined.
easier.
Okay. And this is a sort of fun part where you get to interpret your results, think about how it relates to previous literature, discuss the strengths and the limitations of your work, and sort of what your results mean for future research or for that big debate more generally.
Yeah, I like this. So you've already kind of outlined sections: implications for future research, implications for policy or practice, and I would say at FastTrack we kind of follow this general formula because it works pretty well across fields. And if you do this, you're going to probably tick the main boxes of all the ingredients you need to have to write a stellar discussion section. So I like to first recap the main findings, and then I like to go through and say, okay, these are our main findings. Let's put on the table the weaknesses and limitations of our study before going to interpret it more. So I'm clearing that out of the way. Yep. And you said strengths and how it fits with existing studies, and some of the implications, if you have them, for research, policy, or practice. That looks pretty good. Yeah. And then I guess just coming up to the abstract. The abstract is just kind of a mini picture, a mini snapshot of the whole paper. So it's going to have a central ingredient of the introduction. It's going to have central ingredients of your methods, so your key findings, and just a couple lines from what this all means. So the abstract, we've got other trainings on writing a winning abstract. So I don't think we'll go into that much detail here. But yeah, Lynn, I hope you find this helpful as a guide to what should be in the paper. Any final thoughts on that, Courtney, before we turn to some other questions?
No, I think if you break it down into this sort of structure, it becomes a lot less intimidating to write. If you set off thinking, oh gosh, I have to write a 5,000 word article, or even 2,500 words or 8,000 words. If you break it up into these sections, you can see that really each of these sections is just a few paragraphs, and it just, at least for me, it makes it much more manageable to think about it this way.
Yeah, I like that, Courtney. And you get to a point where maybe the first time you do this and you're kind of starting to work with the structure and framework, and then when you, like us, Courtney, published hundreds of papers, you can just start to do it in your sleep. Okay, so let me stop sharing this, and I want to come back now and take some questions. And Courtney, or sorry, Lynn, let us know what you think about this, if you find that helpful to you and you feel like you can use it. So, okay. So we've got a question about questionnaires from the group. I work on resident satisfaction about resident recreational areas. I need general information about questionnaires. So, yeah. So one thing, again, in scoping out any research project is you need to, we recommend using something called a Pico to define your research question. And once you have that Pico defined, if this Pico's confusing to you, we've got other training on it, but it's basically saying out who's your population, what kind of intervention or exposure are you looking at, do you have any comparison groups to kind of bring into focus what's happening with your population of interest, and what's the outcome measure that you're really looking for. You need these elements to have a well-defined project. And then you want to think about, are there existing questionnaires that you can look at so you don't have to reinvent the wheel? And if not, what are these essential questions you need to define your Pico? Any thoughts on this, Courtney?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think here I would recommend, not myself developing questionnaires, but if I have a student that's doing something, that again recommend that nearest neighbor strategy first, for them to get a good idea of what these sort of questionnaires would look like. But I think also what you mentioned about the Pico, with that information, you can have a good think of what it's really important to aim at when you're asking your questions. And so that will give you a good idea of question design.
Yeah, 100%. And I do see some students really tying themselves in knots and sometimes even developing a bespoke new questionnaire, but later on they can't publish because maybe they didn't, reviewers ask, well, why didn't you use this existing questionnaire, or your new question you've introduced, very creative, but it's just not validated or already established. So if we were going to look at, for example, measuring depression, there's a big project. If Courtney and I want to come up with a new measure of depression, we need to use what's already out there. So I would say your first step is step back and get clarity on your research question with your Pico, and like Courtney said, find your nearest neighbor paper. Thanks for sharing that with us. Okay, we have a thank you from, I think this might be Lynn. She's starting a whole new research project in maternity. That's very cool. Lynn, we like to support you along the journey, so let us know how that evolves. I have a question here on the outline that we made, the guide to the paper. Some scholars argue that there's no sharp distinction between statement of the problem and introduction. I need more clarification on this. Courtney.
I might need more clarification on this too. I'm not sure. Statement of the problem, David, is that something distinct from the introduction?
So the problem statement is often something that is tucked into the introduction. So, and when you say that the statement of the problem, now this can vary, and your department may be asking for something very specific that they've interpreted in a particular way. But often the problem statement is either going to be your research question or a statement of the gap you're trying to fill. Typically, there's a tight connection between the gap you have, what's missing in the literature, what's the issue, and your research question that's going to follow from it. So sometimes the statement of the problem, though, for others can be, we're very concerned, for example, I'm thinking about Lynn on maternity now. I'm very concerned. We have very high inequalities in maternal health, right? And that can also be, the statement of the problem can also be linked to what the big debate is all about. So, I think as Courtney said, you need to get clarity on specifically what your department is asking for, and you may want to look at some successful examples of theses or other projects that, if they, sometimes I've seen in proposals, they want you to say problem statement section and look at how they've approached this, so that is this speaking to the debate, is it speaking to the gap, or is it speaking to your specific research question? But yep, good point. Okay, we got a couple more. Here we go. I don't know if in your previous session you've discussed about qualitative research and research methods in general. Look, qualitative research is, I don't know if it's becoming more or less popular. It's just it's one of the tools in your kit. I think I often try to think about what is the right method to answer your research question. Again, that's a philosophy we've taken at FastTrack. sometimes I see researchers who say, "Ooh, we have these really cool methods. Let's go apply it to stuff." And I think we've all started from the opposite perspective to say, we're really passionate about this, and let's go back and figure out what's the right method to help us break ground on this topic. And I think that just more naturally aligns with a lot of you have voiced to Courtney and I that you're doing this research because you want to make a difference in the world. So I would really tend to think about what your big questions are that you're going to ask, because that's really what you build a career on. And then, yeah, absolutely, as a grad student, start picking up all these tools that you can add in your kit, because they're going to be transferable skills that will help you in jobs if you go to industry or as an academic down the road. Yeah, what do you think about this, Courtney?
Yeah, I've never really understood. I think in some disciplines and departments, even there's some sort of debate about which is better, quantitative or qualitative methods. And I've just never understood that for the reasons you just said. It's anytime I'm thinking about some research that I want to do, and I get my Pico sorted out and I have my problem statement or my research question, the next thing that I think about is what's the best way to answer this? And that might be a method that I've done before, or it might be a new method that I need to learn because that's the best method to answer that question.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I will say, I'm picking up methods. If you're in grad school, now's the time to do it, because I can tell you, as a professor, you don't have time. You kind of get this stock of knowledge that you built up for yourself, and eventually you're going to have to hire people or rely on others to grab onto those new methods. So if you want to learn, right, web scraping techniques, now's the time to do it, because it gets very, very hard. Your time gets squeezed more and more later down the road. The other thing I'd say on guides, one thing I really recommend all students do as the first entry point into research is a systematic review. It has wide-ranging benefits. You'll feel confident. You'll know what the gaps are in your field. You'll know what's really hot in your area, whether it's qualitative, quantitative methods, or what the direction of travel is. And it's also kind of going to get you familiar and in the habit of thinking and engaging like a scientist, which, when you're doing research for the first time, can be quite a shift from maybe the types of papers and projects that you've done before. So yeah, and we have some fantastic step-by-step guides on systematic reviews. If you can't find it, drop us a line, and the assistant in the group, who's out handy to a girl, can definitely link you up with that. Yeah, Courtney, yeah, you've seen our students have pretty good success with systematic reviews, I know.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Yeah, I just got we've had, anyway, we're going to be posting another couple testimonials inside Facebook groups of students who have gone from zero to publishing within just a few short months. They felt lost and confused to already now having great, exciting plans about their third paper that they have underway. So it's a really, we really think this gets you a strong foundation to build upon in all of your research. Okay, let me just take a few others. Oh, and I just see somebody saying happy birthday to Lynn. Lynn, didn't realize it was your birthday. So really cool to have you come hang out with us on your birthday while you're in Rome on holiday. So that's really nice, Lynn. Okay, I think those are the main questions that we've had for today. I think we're coming up. I'll just give people a last chance to drop in some last minute questions for us. I know I was waiting on Amina was going to send us a PowerPoint, but didn't get it. So guys, do bear in mind, I sometimes get people that I missed the session. If you want us to cover something for you, DM us, email us, send it to us in advance, also so that we can have a little bit more time to prepare for you, to give you that kind of quality feedback that will help you. So, oh yeah, let's say 65 years old in the Coliseum. What a way to celebrate a birthday. That's awesome, Lynn. Yeah, wish we could be there with you. Okay, Dawn's got a good question. Dawn, thanks for coming in with us. How do you make the writing process interesting and enjoyable? And I'm thinking about Courtney when you said that the result is kind of the dead part. Well, what do you think about this, Courtney?
I mean, I think thinking about this. Think about this early on when you're setting out the research that you're doing. So you want to make sure that you're focusing on a topic that is really interesting to you, and it's going to keep you motivated throughout the process, including the writing process.
Yeah, I think that comes down. I mean, you're going to eventually get kind of working on the same project for so long, you can get a little bit tired of it. That's why it's so fundamental from the very outset that you have a brightly burning fire for your topic. For me personally, that's been working on things that I'm outraged about, or I think are unfair in society, that I want to use the ability that I have to try to make a difference about. So that really, really helps. I think the other thing to make the writing process interesting and enjoyable is to not make some of the common mistakes that people make when writing, which is not having an outline, not having a structure, trying to write before it's the right time to be writing. Because that can just be a recipe for going in circles, feeling lost and confused, and really hating writing. Writing is really the last 10%, I think even maybe 5% of the project.
Yeah. I think in addition to not writing before you're ready is to write some things, at the right time. So when you've settled on your methods, write up your method section because they're going to be fresh in your mind at that point. And know what your gap in the literature is, because you don't want to get to the end of your paper and then try to make your results fit into a gap that you don't have fully formed before you started. So really breaking up the writing process throughout the research steps is important.
Yeah, I think that's quite helpful. I mean, one approach we take is to say write the paper from the inside out. I see so many people again trying to write linearly, introduction, methods, results, conclusion, but really that's not the way you've done the research. I think it's just more natural to write as you go along. Okay, I've defined my methods. I just did the methods. Now I can write up the method section. I've got clarity on my results now and my key findings. Now I'm going to write the results section. And I just see some students feeling the need to do something, or maybe their faculty or department wants them to submit something, so they just feel they have to put something together even though they're not ready. And that can be a recipe for frustration too. Really good points. Okay, I want to take Tellini's got a question here from YouTube. Really appreciate our subscribers on YouTube, and we're trying to post more videos, and so we do take all your questions for those of you joining from different streams. If you haven't, though, do join our Facebook group, because then we can engage and be in the DMs together. So when is the right time to do snowballing during a systematic review? Courtney, I know you've got a good answer for this one.
So I would say in terms of snowballing, if you're using the method to search your references of your included papers, and of course, when you're doing your data extraction, that's a good time to look at the references to see if there's some additional papers. I always save, if you're using snowballing, for instance, by using the cited by feature on Google, let's say, I always save that for the end, just because it's something that you could do all in one go for all of your different studies. But like searching the reference list, you might as well do it while you're extracting data.
Yeah. I have to say personally, I on the systematic reviews I do, I kind of skip snowballing unless I'm really struggling to find papers and I need to leave no stone unturned. It just can be cumbersome for a relatively low payoff. So it's not my, and I also find it's a step that is a little bit of a threat to replicability. It's a step that's a little bit harder for others to go through and replicate. So personally, just kind of the reward to the extra effort kind of curve is not there for me. That said, it can be a nice thing to do, and if reviewers ask for it or others, then definitely you should do it.
I think also if you've identified a really hot topic, there might be a case for not doing it just because you want to get those findings out the door. So I know with the work we've done around COVID, for instance, we did not use snowballing because we just wanted to get those results out.
Yeah, exactly. So it kind of helps, and this is where your mentors can help you to say, these are the steps that you really, really, they're indispensable, you have to do, and these are the steps that maybe are not, they will add, but they're not strictly necessary. Another step like that can be grading the quality of research. That in the interest of speed is sometimes a step that we've skipped, knowing that if the reviewers ask for it, we could do it later and add that in without threatening the integrity of the research. Whereas if we have to go back, rip up and start the whole search over, that's a fundamental flaw. That's a big problem.
Yeah, I think it also relates to the type of systematic review you're doing. So if you were doing a meta-analysis on a very specific part of the literature, you might go the extra mile to make sure that you're getting all that data for the meta-analysis. But if you're doing a scoping review or you're sort of seeing where the evidence is and where the research gaps are, then I think doing a systematic review and leaving the snowballing aside for that is okay.
Yeah. We've got another one from the Facebook group here. What's the best way to write your conclusions and recommendations? So, when you say what's the best way, do you mean kind of the framing and phrasing of the language? Um, so, I'm not sure I 100% follow you, but in terms of writing the conclusion, I sometimes like to use lists to keep it very simple. You don't need to write a Pulitzer Prize. So, for example, you could start your conclusion off with, our systematic review on inequalities in maternal mortality identified or highlighted a number of important points, or first, second, third, fourth. Or you could say our study has, as with any systematic review, ours has several limitations, and number those. And I have no problem with that, because what you want, you're not writing fiction, right? You're not writing a book that's supposed to be engaging or enjoyable to read. Obviously, it's a plus if you can do that. But you don't need to win a Pulitzer Prize. You just need to make it simple and clear so people can evaluate the quality of the research that you did. So I hope that's answering your question. Courtney, do you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I think that's great. I would just say that, and also make sure that you're saying something that's useful for that big debate that you're.
Sorry, I missed that last part, Courtney.
Oh, I was just saying, make sure that you speak back to that hot debate that you set out in the introduction.
Yeah, that's really important too. You definitely need to kind of go full circle and kind of stitch up your paper and deliver on what you said you were going to deliver on with your big research question. Yeah, absolutely. Cellini saying, great insights, thanks. Glad we could be helpful with that. Let's come back to Don. Don saying, I always get exactly. I find it difficult to believe this story, and more importantly, make it interesting. This is, again, goes back to the point we were making about our results and constructing the paper. One thing that we use with our quantitative students, also with our qualitative students, to be fair, any students doing an empirical set of studies, is to try to construct your tables and figures, or what we call a result set, that kind of basic set of results. And you want figures and tables to have one big message that's contributing to the story in your paper's results section. So I really think, especially with statistics, that have that result set. You want your results clear and in order and structured before you start to write up. Otherwise, again, writing can be miserable if the story changes, especially if co-authors involved, they want to change things around, then no other co-author disagrees. So we kind of take that step and say, first, let's get our result set right. Let's get all our co-authors to agree that this is the way we want to package the paper. And then it's just a matter of executing and writing up what you've already agreed on with your colleagues and co-authors. Yeah. Do you use those results set too, Courtney, in your empirical work?
Yeah, I think with any analysis, there's just, when you think that you have to report all the results, there's so much you could report. You couldn't conceivably put everything in one paper usually. So I think it's so important to think about what is the story that your paper is telling, and then framing your results to that end.
Yeah. Yeah, there's this temptation. I do see it with students for the first time. They want to put everything in the paper, and you just can't. You just exactly. Sometimes your projects you have to think about it as a stream of papers, maybe multiple papers. You have a whole PhD's worth of work, maybe a whole career's worth of work. So not everything is going to make the cut. You can use appendices to help you. Online appendices are a kind of secret weapon if you really don't want to let something go and you want it in your paper. But remember, if you make one or two big points, your readers are likely to remember those. If you make 12 points, it's going to be hard for them to know what to walk away with. So don't overwhelm them. Just stick to the big messages. And the papers that usually get published in the highest of the high impact journals, we have a great session with Jocelyn Clark while she was editor of The Lancet. So the key thing is to define a paper's message and also be able to boil it down to one simple sentence. And that's really really important. And I've seen that it's really true in my papers that get over 1,000 citations that have one simple message, and that definitely amplifies their impact. Um, yeah. Okay, we got another question on that. Somebody saying they're really learning from us. That's great to hear. Yeah, we like doing these question and answer sessions. This is really your time with us, so do take advantage of it. Here we go. What's the secret for making a research story interesting? Is it getting feedback from mentors, or what else? Yeah, Courtney, that's a good one for you here.
Yeah, so if you've already identified what that big debate is in the field, and this is a high impact paper, then it's very likely that, I mean, that's a secret for making your research story interesting. Speaking to a big debate in the field, speaking to something that's really important, something that's going on. Often mentors can have that sort of sense of what that debate is, and how you can sort of tweak your narrative to fit into that debate nicely.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right, Courtney. I think getting feedback from mentors, you definitely want to think about your mentors who can add the highest value advice, and you want your professors who have maybe published in Science and Nature in the top journals to help you with that framing. The most valuable points they can help you is picking your topic and helping you get that framing right to hit a top journal and crafting the story. That's something that takes experience. It's hard to do because they're having a conversation at a high level with people in their field, and if it's hard for you just at the very beginning to have that kind of maturity and understanding to craft that narrative. So but yeah, I think, Courtney, as you said, if you have a hot debate, then it's by its very nature, your findings are going to be interesting to a lot of people. Um,
The
so
other the other
yeah,
case
Courtney.
for using a the other case for using a mentor is, I think, that sometimes students get so deep into the research that they start missing the forest for the trees and start losing sight of what that big picture is. Just like students might want to put all the results in the paper, then it becomes hard to pull out what's actually important. So mentors come in really handy there.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I remember when I was a graduate student, my first research assistant project, I asked my professor, "Is this an important finding? I can't really tell. I know it's statistically significant, but I felt like I just didn't have my feet."
Yeah.
And then here we go. We got somebody saying knowing the takeaway in one sentence is key. Yeah. And Don came back and saying to us, "Yep, all about the big message. Hot debate, always be interesting." Yeah, excellent. And how can you know? Some people, how do I know it's a hot debate? Well, you can scope out and see there's lots of citations on it. You can see sometimes other ways is it talked about in popular media, depending on what your field is, that might be relevant, or especially if you see it in op-eds where there's debate and discussion about an ongoing issue, that can be especially relevant for those of you who are in social science. So yeah, I think that combination of the citations and kind of popular media can give you a clue that you're working on a debate that's relevant. Got another one here. So if you want to do a systematic review on uncharted territory and you can't find a solid structure because no one has done it before, should you try to do a scoping interview or even a commentary first? And so I think if you're saying to do a systematic review, there needs to be enough activity in your field going on. You can't do a systematic review of 2 to 3 papers. So sometimes I see students who say, "Oh, I'm doing this really exciting thing. I want to do a systematic review on it." And they're so far ahead of the field, there's no papers on it. It doesn't really work for a systematic review. And that can also be getting too far ahead of like that can be a little bit risky. It can be a little bit risky because, well, if you do have that much of a brilliant idea, well, nobody wins a Nobel Prize as a graduate student. Others will take credit for it. And when you're doing such an innovative idea or something that's so far from left field, it can be hard to get published. I mean, Albert Einstein encountered this and having a lot of his work rejected early on. I'm not saying that's going to happen to you, but it's definitely a harder path to go down. So we tend to recommend our grad students take kind of like a kind of low risk, medium to high reward approach so they can finish nicely and get to the next step. You have any thoughts on this, Courtney?
Yeah, I think everything you said is right. I think can't do a systematic review if there hasn't been studies on it yet, and you don't necessarily want to be the first one to do that study if you're just starting off that semester.
Yeah. But I would kind of go against. I think you want to say scoping, review, or commentary. I would advise against going down those paths, and maybe I would just make sure that your topic has enough activity in it, and sometimes that can simply be by connecting it to a bigger discussion. We have a student that Courtney and I have been working on with, and she's very interested in manual drafting approaches to design. I'm very concerned that technology has led to people losing kind of that lost craft and art of just drawing for design. But unfortunately, that's not where the discussion is in the field. So we've had to engineer a creative way to connect that topic to bigger debates, so that the key points and observations from a research will be able to get into some higher impact journals in our field. Okay, let's we got a couple more, and then we're going to start slowing down. How did you find the bug debate, or the most important issue in the field? For example, any COVID-19 study was hot, but less so now. We have a scoping technique to do that. Courtney, how do you approach that? Maybe we could share about what we do.
Yeah, I get ideas for my research listening to the news.
Yeah.
And seeing what's happening in popular media. Sometimes I get ideas, when there's a debate in your field that's, the topic of a commentary or special issue, you have a unique perspective on that.
Yeah. I mean, again, the citation searches can be your friend here.
We have a training on this, right?
Yeah, we got some good training. If you look at our convergence method on how to pick a topic, it's well worth going through that to just see if your topic's on point. Replicate our steps. It helps you forecast the impact of your topic. Just almost by designing your title, it's possible to predict in the future how many citations you're going to get with a relative degree of accuracy. So make sure, I mean, the median number of citations that papers got over the last couple of years is 0. And we think we can help you do a little bit better than that, a lot better than that. So definitely take that time. So let's see here. Yeah. Grad students, yep. Low risk, yeah. Medium to medium high reward research topics, if you can. Of course, not everybody's going to fit those parameters. But if you take high reward, high risk, you could make it big, but you might end up with nothing. And I would just tend to save that maybe for when you have a little bit more job security down the road. Again, this is a tactical choice and not one that we can make for you. But for most of our students, we try to go in this kind of space. Somebody says, "Oh, you can get a research idea from listening to the news." Wow, cool. Yeah, there are a lot of students, for example, who have been inspired by the energy crisis that's going on. And I know in the field of public health, or sometimes dealing with contemporary events, that is the state of public health. How do you protect people who are in harm's way? People are concerned about the implications of the cost of living crisis on people's health and well-being. Absolutely. I'm not saying you need to go just chase after the latest fad or trend, but it's definitely one approach that some people have taken with good success and have built up and engaged in very good careers. So okay, I can see you're repeating us. Yeah, it's not per paper. Over time, I do want to be clear and not misspeak. It's over the last 2 years. So if you look at the time of papers published, within 2 years, the median number of citations is 0. Now, it will grow a little bit over time, but it still is disappointingly low. You can get all these data are publicly available. I can send them to you on request, but it's really, I mean, I'm not wanting to produce papers to be intellectual landfill and nobody looks at them. They disappear into electronic ether. We want to, for us, we want to change the world, bend the arc of history in some small way. And somebody makes a really good point here. I think this is a really important point. Yeah. especially for those doing a PhD. What do you think here, Courtney? Do you agree with this?
Yep, this is true.
Yeah. You see so many who want to, and I admire the enthusiasm, go dive into a really big, challenging space. And many of you do love a good challenge, is why you're researchers and you're up for it. But I would say do things you need to do, tick the box, get that PhD done, and then go out and take the challenging one, because your life isn't gonna hang in the balance if you get it right or not. So here's a good question: is it feasible to write papers on literature like Shakespeare and publish them? Courtney.
Yeah, actually, my husband has a colleague who's a philosopher, and all he writes on is Shakespeare. So definitely.
All right, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So yeah, can you say a little bit more about that, Courtney? I mean, following the same steps, there's a debate in the field and interpreting elements of Shakespeare. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know specifically what he's doing, but there are people writing on literature, and there are debates about the meaning of literature and what's being done with it and how it relates to contemporary events, all sorts of things. So just
Yeah.
if that's something you're interested in, put it into Google Scholar and see what you get.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to think sometimes from a more sociological perspective, but people might be looking at, elements of, say, lens of class or lens of, lesbian or queer theory, going cross-secting a paper and analysis and interpretation. So yeah, some of these same principles are there even in the humanities. You have to have a gap and a big debate to really hone in on a contribution and communicate that to people in your field. I think this is a great point to stop. Some really good questions today. I really enjoyed the session with you. Don't forget that send to us in advance your submissions so that we can have time to prepare. Again, this is your time. And some of you, if you're interested in working together in a more close, accelerated, or advanced way, do get in touch. Courtney and I are always in the DMs, and we love hearing from you, and we can see if you could be a good fit. So, with that, I think just off to wish everybody a really good weekend. Have a restful break and gear up for a productive week next week. Courtney, it is always nice to see you again, and a pleasure to have you join us. Even though I know you've got to head down to a cafe to do it, it's just not the same when you're not with us in the studio. So.
It's my pleasure.
Awesome. All right, bye everybody. We will see you next week.
Bye guys.